Hello, listeners. Kathy Lawless, Life Story Curator, bringing you the podcast series, How Did I Get Here? A series of interviews designed for people just starting out in their careers, people in transition, or possibly feeling stuck, and giving them access to the stories of people who have been there, done that, so that they might be inspired with some new ideas, or maybe just comforted knowing they're not alone, that everybody starts somewhere and everybody goes through times of transition and times when they feel stuck. Today, I'm very excited to be interviewing Jen Coken, and she is an executive leadership coach, a Forbes 500 speaker, and an imposter syndrome expert. Like that isn't enough to have three different titles and roles. So welcome, Jen.
Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm very excited to learn more about all of those three things, but I always like to start with the icebreaker questions first, which gives us a little bit of insight into where you grew up, how many siblings that you had, where you were in the birth order, and how you think that kind of shaped you as an adult.
I grew up in Ohio, Michigan and Ohio, so I'm a Midwest girl, and I think that makes me nice, which in the Midwest, it really means someone might be talking about you behind your back, but you learn to be nice. That's the thing in the Midwest. Let's see, I was the youngest. I have one biological brother, and then my stepdad and my mom met and I actually introduced them. They got together when I was 15 and my stepbrother was 15. And so I also have a stepbrother and sister that I don't usually use the word step, but so there's four of us. My stepbrother and I are a few months apart. My brother and my stepsister are a few months apart, but my brother was out of the house and so was she. So my stepbrother and I used to, go to our folks' home on college vacations and that sort of thing. And I think having that blended family and a different kind of family because our parents were never married. I mean, they were together for 33 years and only got married the last few years after my mother was diagnosed with cancer. Because my mom said to me, "It's not financial, but things have shifted between your stepdad and I." I think for me, the way that shaped me was more of understanding there can be different kinds of families and blended families. And it isn't always, back then there was a stigma about parents getting divorced. And so I guess it was easier for me to be with it all, with that blending, if that makes sense.
Wow! And you introduced your parents. You said,
Yes.
how did that go? That's a curious thing.
So my mom and I, it was Rosh Hashanah, we're Jewish, and we were at services. And afterwards, we went to go have some dinner. And it was at a place called the Lion and the Lamb in Cleveland, Ohio. And the Lion and the Lamb was also a piano bar. Now, my biological father and mother used to be in community theater, and my mother still was. And she and I and my brother were all in the show together. And our musical director played piano at this piano bar. So once we finished our dinner, mom and I went into the piano bar area. And if you can imagine, there's a piano with like a U-shaped bar around it. And I guess back then it was okay to have me there. I was having a Shirley Temple with my mom because she was there with me. And that was when people could smoke, right? And there was
Yeah.
this super cute man who was checking my mom out on the other side of the U and waving his hands because somebody was blowing smoke in his face. And I very coyly said, "There's a seat over here if you'd like to take it." And he sat next to my mom, and the rest is history.
So you picked up on the signals, even though they
I
were.
something.
That's awesome. So if you're sounds like if your parents were kind of musically inclined, did you as a young person play any instruments or did you play sports or what were your activities as a young person?
Let's see. So when I was 3 is when I began learning the piano. And I think when I was 4, I began taking tap and ballet lessons. I took French horn lessons and played in the band through junior high and into high school. I tried field hockey, but I'm also 5'10", and I grew very tall very quickly. And so my nickname in junior high was Horse because I was like a horse that couldn't get up on its legs, and very unsteady. So, I have large hands and very tall. People would always ask me, "Do you play basketball?" But truth was, I had very little athletic ability. I couldn't get up the rope in gym class. I couldn't dribble. And you dribble and you run. I don't even know what it's called, down the court. I tried out for field hockey. It was not for me. But then fast forward in college, I played rugby for a
Wow.
couple of years. And I know I was captain of my rugby team, but it was only because all the cute guys were on the rugby team, the guys team, and I wanted to go hang out with them.
So there was an ulterior motive then for the sport.
Yes.
Okay, so are you introvert or an extrovert?
Hmm. Well, I would say I'm an extroverted introvert, right? Because in truth, whether you're an introvert or extrovert is where you get your energy. So I'm a very bubbly, vivacious, outgoing person. It does take me a lot to go to a networking event or be in groups. And I've actually done workshops called Effortless Networking to share with people how I got over my own social anxiety. Where I get my energy is being by myself in my home, cooking a good meal, reading, watching something stupid on TV, gardening, that kind of thing.
Okay, yeah. So it is really about where you get your energy. Um, and yeah, usually an extrovert, if the first thing would be, oh, are we going out? They don't even care where, right? It's like, are there going to be people there? Doesn't matter who. My sister is on the very, very extreme side of extrovert, and I was always kind of in the middle. I've become more extroverted, I think, as I stepped out of corporate, and I think recognized I needed more social than I thought I did. But when you're in corporate, a lot of times you need that time out, right? You, like you said, you gotta take that break, recharge the battery, because many times your schedule's not your own. You're in a lot of meetings and stuff, so
And with a lot of people, yeah. So you
yeah,
need that recharge. Exactly.
takes your energy. So okay, so on the fun meter, on a scale of 1 to 5, 1 being couch potato and 5 being the life of the party.
5.
5. Introverted mode, huh?
Well, I'm a performer, right? So as a kid, I was in plays, I took voice lessons. I did stand-up comedy, not as a kid, but as an adult for 6 years when I was living out in Colorado. So I've always had this desire to be in front of people and make a difference and perform. So that piece of me, I've always been an entertainer and funny. That started when I was a little kid, a little kid, because I was always like I said, the gangly, taller than everybody, not popular. And so I became funny as a way to compensate for
Yeah.
that.
Yeah. Funny how we find ways to compensate for things, right? I
Yes,
guess as
those,
young people, we all need to find that group in that niche where we feel comfortable because it's so uncomfortable at times.
yes, it is. Yeah.
Okay, let's go to the risk taking meter then. Same scale 1 to 5. Where do you put yourself?
A 5.
5.
Well, wait,
So,
wait, wait. Let me backtrack. Can I backtrack? I'm going to say this because I've discovered something about myself recently. All right. Because I've been really steeped in working with people around imposter syndrome and found that it's not just that you doubt yourself. If you try to get things perfect all the time, if you don't like delegating, if you shy away from people calling you an expert, if you don't like asking for help, and if you were what we call a natural genius, in other words, things came easily to you as a kid, which they did for me, that's part of imposter syndrome. So what has happened, and I've begun to recognize this, is I really, on risks, I will take big risks if I think it's going to come easy and naturally to me. But those areas of life, for example, I've always loved big band music. My father had a jazz show when he was in college, and he kind of raised me on big band and jazz music. And I always wanted to learn East Coast swing, and I could fake it, but I never wanted to deal with the lessons because I wasn't good at it naturally. So I've realized there's certain things I won't go do because I already think I'm going to fail, and I'd probably be a 3 on those things. But other things, like literally, I could speak in front of a crowd of 650, 1,000 people impromptu, extemporaneously, and I have no problem with that whatsoever. But you ask me to go meet a blind date, a guy at a dance, and I'm like, oh, no, I'm sorry, I'm busy that night. I have to wash my hair.
wow. Well, thank you for explaining that perspective and how it ties into that imposter syndrome. So I'm sure we're going to get more into that as we go through your story. But that you really got my juices going here in terms of all those things you said. I'm like, wait a minute. Some of that really resonated.
Right? Yeah, you don't realize that. I read, yeah, yeah. There's stuff. We'll get into it later, I'm sure. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Well, and I just love those two questions because those, the risk and the fun meter, I think really come out as we go through your story, and some of the decisions that you make, some of the things that you maybe choose not to do or to do, really come out because of that. So,
yeah,
okay. So, Jen, tell us a little bit about what it's like being an executive leadership coach, a Forbes 500 speaker, and an imposter syndrome expert. What is that like? And then we'll get into how did I get here?
yeah. I love my life. I love my clients. I love it. Really, what it's about. If you were in my office with me, my office is painted bright yellow because it reminds me of being joyous. It was also my mother's favorite color, and it's the third chakra in the body, which is your seat of personal power, the solar plexus chakra. Okay, but there's one sign on my wall that just says happy place.
Ah,
When I hung out my own shingle to be, because I've been coaching people for over 20 years, and there was a point where I realized this was my path as a business rather than working for another company. And I did work with a coach, and she's the one who really got me to see. And I literally started crying when I thought about this, Kathy, because she kept saying, "Well, why do you want to do this?" And I started tearing up and saying, you know what? I just want people to be happy. I'm like a 6-year-old. I want people to be happy and love themselves.
mhm.
And so, as a coach, that's honestly at the end of the day, the work I do with people, whether they are starting out or in transition. I work with a lot of people who are in transition or up against like overwhelm and uncertainty, their own uncertainty about their path or what's next. And what we do is get them just, squarely anchored in who they are, in their truth, almost like they have a taproot sunk deep into the ground, and it doesn't matter the circumstances that are coming at them. They just, you know, move with them, but they're rooted. And that really, at the end of the day, I love, 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 love what I do.
Well, I can tell because you just light up, and that's very cool. Okay, well then let's talk about how did I get here? How did you get here? Then we're going to go back to that 15-year-old, I guess, or junior high, and maybe even younger. What did you want to be when you grew up? I think you said an actor, performer, but so take us back that time frame, and then we're going to come forward.
Okay, so first of all, you should know that I skipped second grade and I graduated high school when I was 16 and started college when I was 16, freshman year, and wasn't planning to start college that young because my mother and I said, maybe I should wait a year and not just work. But I mean, we talked about me working to save some money, but in her mind, she told me this later, was to gain some emotional maturity because even though I was tall and looked older than everybody else, my maturity level was not at the same place that the 17 and 18-year-olds maturity level was because, I was I was 16 years old when I graduated high school. But
Yeah.
through that time, the thing I loved to do was theater. And I had it in my head forever that I wanted to go to the high school for performing arts, like you see in the movie Fame, and I wanted to perform in musicals on Broadway. It wasn't about being in movies, it was about living in New York City and performing on Broadway. And my mother always wanted to be a rockette. There's a lot of music and performing in my family. My father's mother was accepted into the Boston Opera Company, but stayed behind as the youngest Jewish girl to take care of her aging parents. So my father's sister was very musical and performed, etc. My brother is a musician to this day. He plays death metal and blues, and he's a computer genius. So that's what he does on the side. But it's kind of in my family. We all did community theater together, and that's what I wanted to go to college for. I was thinking a liberal arts school, but so I was going to wait a year, and all my friends were going, and my best friend was going to the local state university, Kent State, and I went with her to visit the campus, et cetera. And she's like, "Couldn't you just see the two of us being here? It'd be so fun." Yeah, I would love to do that. And I went home to tell my mom, and she's like, "Well, what about acting?" And I said, "Well, why don't I go there for a year?" And then I'll transfer schools. And she said, I don't know if she said it to me then or earlier, but at some point she said something like, acting's hard. And if you move to New York City, it's an expensive city and you're going to have to like wait tables and make your own money because not everybody makes it. Okay, I know. So I get to college and freshman year, I didn't know what to declare because I knew I was transferring. I think I
Yeah.
was psychology or something like that. And my family wanted me to become, because I was always in debate, they wanted me to become a lawyer. Anyhow, freshman year, I'm in my American National Government class, and the professor shows us some clips of the 60s. And I went to Kent State for Dead in Ohio, the shootings in 1970. So it is a right history of peace and justice and the whole bit. And he starts talking about why it is imperative that each of us exercise our right to vote, how citizens have made a difference, how all the social movements have been spearheaded by young people. He starts going on and on. And I'm getting him now, but he and I are still friends, by the way. I'm getting goosebumps as I'm sitting there listening to him, just enthralled, like, oh my gosh, there's this whole world out there. You mean I could be the kind of person who can make a difference? Because up until that point, I thought the way I was going to make a difference was on stage, so to speak, until I realized I could actually change people's minds and get people to vote and do. I became an activist. I really became an activist in that moment. And he had just started a graduate program in political campaign management. And there was no other school in the country that was offering that. And I said, that's it. I'm staying here 6 years. I'm going to get my undergraduate degree in political science, my graduate degree in political campaign management. I'm going to go get great people elected. I'm going to pass laws that protect our country. And that is that. And all my friends always joke because from college, they're like, you were the only one of us with any ambition. You actually would study. I don't think I didn't study nearly as much as I should have because everything came easy to me, right?
Mhm.
So that was it. And then I ran my first political campaign at the age of 21 in Southern Ohio, and my candidate lost 48 to 52. She was a Democrat running in kind of a very conservative Bible Belt area. So the fact that she did so well said a lot about her. She was a local secretary. She was a secretary at the college, and had 8 kids and involved in her local church, and very middle America kind of human being, and really wonderful and a lovely human being. But I got so jaded because I felt like I worked so hard and didn't get to where we wanted. And I knew that people had contributed to her campaign, like the Speaker of the House, who would expect her to vote in line with his principles. And I went, wait a minute, she's going to get elected. She should have her own principles. And so it really, in that moment, Kathy, I'm like, now what am I going to do? I just spent 6 years and all this money on this master's degree, and I've completely feel like I've had the rug pulled out from under me. So I go to my mentor at the time, this wonderful woman by the name of Dr. Trudy Sternagel. She had started the Women's Studies Department. She really taught me how to think critically. I took every class that she offered. It was comparative politics and political philosophy. And each semester we'd read 2 books, and we'd have to compare those 2 books. And the test would always be you had to answer 2 questions, a question about one author, like human locke, and a question about the other author. You could answer those 2. Or she would start a dialogue between these 2 political philosophers, and you had to finish it. And then the 4th question was make up your own question and answer it, and you were judged on both the question and the answer. So I learned how to think critically and how to research things. And I went to Trudy and said, what the heck do I do? And she hands me, people come on campus to recruit. And she hands me this flyer. She goes, well, ACORN and the PERGs, public interest research groups, are their grassroots organizations. They're interviewing people. Why don't you go interview with them? Okay. I didn't know what else to do. So I go interview them with them both. And I wound up taking a job with the PERGs because their salary was $11,000 a year with a master's degree, and ACORN only paid $9,000 a year. My
Yikes!
father was livid. So
Yikes!
you have a master's degree, you're making, and I used to temp in the summer for all the big corporations in downtown Cleveland because the temp agency knew I could go in and catch on to things quickly. And I could have had a great corporate career, but I was such the activist and we're going to right all the wrongs in the world. And so for the next 6 years, I worked for the PERGs, both on passing good environmental legislation to protect the water and the air and the land in New Jersey, and then headed up my own nonprofit at the age of 28, organizing 600 college campuses to end hunger and poverty, and really rewired how people thought about students being involved in the movement of ending poverty and ending hunger. Because I said, why aren't you going to the people impacted? And that's been a theme of how do we go to the people who are impacted by these issues and ask them what they want versus us assuming they want a sock drive or a clothing drive. And so we created this thing called Project Partnership, where the students would work with local like providers, soup kitchens, and homeless shelters, et cetera, find out what the needs were, go into the population, do a survey, find out what the needs were, and the students would fill the gap. So we had pre-law students at Clark University in Massachusetts working with homeless people to get their ID back because they had to have an ID to get into certain shelters. And from there, I was recruited to move to Washington, D.C. by then Congressman Tony Hall and his counterpart, Bill Emerson, Democrat and Republican. And that's the other piece for me is I've always worked across the aisles. It's never been about partisan politics. It's important for me to bridge those gaps. I've always been a peacemaker, bringing people together. And so I started something called the Congressional Hunger Center, which is now 25 years old. And they develop leaders to fight hunger, both nationally and internationally. And I did that for 4 years. I got it from $0 to 3.5 million, and I got bored. And that's another theme in my life is there's this entrepreneurial spirit where I take something, I like, give me a rock and an empty Slim Jim wrapper and a pen and go start a company. I'm like, right on, let me go do it. But as soon as it's up and going, I don't want to be involved with the day to day, get other people to do that. I'm the big idea and the inspiration. And how do we leap really high to get over that hurdle? So I did that for 4 years and went into business for myself. And Ariana Huffington was my first client back then.
That's kind of a nice first client.
I know, right? And I was teaching nonprofits how to think like businesses and how to help them raise money. And then I got tired of working by myself. So everything, all of my jobs have been 3 to 4, like between 3 and 5 years. But I'll say a side note in just a minute. So from there, I went to work for the National Parks Conservation Association and launched a massive federal lobbying effort to get more funding into the parks, which we achieved. Was eventually laid off, but had met and fell in love with a park ranger and moved to Colorado to be with him and broke up with him
Okay.
3 months after I got there.
Well, I was wondering how the Colorado thing happened. So yeah,
Yes.
okay. Well,
Yeah.
all the
And
gaps
so
are starting to fill.
all the gaps are starting to fill in. So then when I got to Colorado, I knew my boyfriend at the time, and I had 3 other girlfriends that lived there, didn't have a job. But in the month of February, I met with 47 people.
In 1 month.
Anybody in 1 month.
Like like job interviews, or this is more information
Informational.
interviews?
Yeah, both of them, coffee dates, morning, 3 a day, right? Breakfast or coffee, lunch, dinner, or drinks, whatever it needed to be. Anybody told me to meet with anybody, I'd go meet with them because I was trying to sort out, do I want to go back into politics? Because really, up until that point, when I stopped with that race, when we lost when I was 21, and now fast forward, this is now 2004, so I'm turning 40. So 19 years later, while I'd been a grassroots organizer, I really had never gotten involved in electoral politics specifically. I had been on the fringes of it, right? So I'm trying to suss out and I had been doing a lot with nonprofits. Do I want to stay the nonprofit route? Do I want to go back into politics? Eventually, I took a job as the political director for Congresswoman Diana DeGette, and from there, headed up what's called a 527 for the Democrats to get more Democrats in the state house. Was the chair of the Democratic Party, ran for the state house, and it eventually wound up as the director of the Western Clean Energy Campaign, stopping 37 proposed coal-fired power plants from being built out west. Did that in about 5.5 years, and then guess what? I got bored because we had done that.
Yeah.
and there was more work to be done, but it was much more administrative rulemaking. And I walked into my deputy's office one day and said, "What happened to the word campaign in Western Clean Energy Campaign?" Because that's what I loved. I loved the end goal. And how do I get from here to there? Like I said, like MacGyver. People thought it couldn't be done. We did it with, it wasn't me. We built this massive coalition, and we just had smart people on the ground doing the right things. And so I spent about a year thinking about what I wanted to do next, and then was recruited to come back east by Greenpeace to be their program director, which was a new position right after my mom died. And I moved at the worst time I could have. Mom had just died, position that nobody had ever had in the US, working 90 hours a week. And while it was an environmental group, it was a different kind of environmental group. It was a direct action group versus grassroots organizing. So it was a type of, I had to learn a lot, and my learning curve was very high, and I was not in my best place, but also was a really, at that time, a very tough place to work. It was not a good place to work, especially for a woman, very misogynistic at that time. And they wound up firing me. It was the only time in my life I've ever been fired. And I wound up on Chinatown in DC with like my phone and nowhere to go because they had put me up in an apartment, and I was building a house I could no longer afford. So there I
Oh,
am, like,
wow.
what do I do now? And that's when I wrote my book. And fast forward, I know I'm getting into the long thing, but you want me to keep going, I can keep going.
Well,
And
let's take a pause there because there's quite a bit
yes.
that happened there. So, were there were there opportunities in there that you turned down, or were you very open to this is they want me, I'll go there? I mean, you moved several times. It sounds like so. It was it more cause based that if the cause pulled or drew you, you would go, or how did you make your decision?
Well, when I was so again, when I was living in New Jersey, it was for the same group, and I was working with the same group of people on different environmental laws. I got bored. It wasn't a big enough challenge for me. It was the kind of thing where once I knew how to do it, I mean, let me tell you, I attribute my training, they're now called Environment America or Public Interest Research Group. I'm as good as what I do now because of the training that I had back then. And I'm still friends with the people because you were working like dogs and you're working 24/7, and it's all for a cause. When I moved to Boston to head up the National Student Campaign against hunger and homelessness, I wanted something bigger and meatier to sink my teeth into. And the Pergs, that was their organization. So it was the 6 years I was with the same group. And there was a point where it's interesting. There's a point, it's not that I think I have the right way to do things, but I do think it's important to empower people around me. And so when I spoke about this new way of organizing where we are empowering homeless people to ask them what they need, they felt that was too radical. It was not a good situation at that time. And so during that time, Congressman Hall went on a 23-day hunger strike. So the Democrats had become the majority in the 92. And one of the things they wanted to do was cut fat out of Congress. And they cut all the select committees. There was like a select committee on aging and a select committee on hunger and a select committee on, say, domestic violence, that kind of thing. Well, Tony, in protest, because we used to call the select committee the lint trap for hunger issues. What most people don't know is different, HHS, so the Health and Human Services, governs child breakfast and lunch programs. USDA governs emergency food assistance. Another department governs welfare reform. So if budget cuts are being made, nobody's minding the store. And the select committee was really the group that was minding it all. And Tony is a very faithful person. And so he did a lot of prayer, and he chose to go on this hunger strike. And then me and a bunch of other EDs around the country joined him for 5 days and got him a ton of press. And so he looked to me and the student movement and said, how do we develop more people like you? And recruited me to come to DC. So I had lived in DC in 1981, studying for a semester. I always knew I wanted to go back. And I
Mm,
felt like it was the right opportunity at the right time. And I learned so much. And I also had visited Colorado, and I feel like Colorado's another home to me. And when I met Rick, who was my boyfriend at the time, I realized all these chances that I had taken. I used to be an endurance cyclist. I would do 330 miles over 4 days and 550 miles in Alaska over 7 days with other people raising money. And I realized all these things I had done, the one chance I had never taken was on love. I
Oh,
had never, yeah,
interesting.
right. I mean, I had been in love multiple times, but never, you're going to move somewhere to be with a guy? That's so weak. So judgy about women who would do that kind of thing until I realized I needed to put my money where my mouth was. Rick was never moving east. And if I wanted to figure this thing out, at the time I had been laid off from my job. So it was a good time of any to move.
Yeah.
And so I did, and then realized we weren't meant for each other. But I stayed, I got married, divorced, and did all these other things when I was in Colorado. So it wasn't necessarily the cause. It's more like at the time I needed something more, and I was thinking about something more. And it's a lot of what I do when I'm coaching my client. It felt congruent with who I am. It
Yeah.
felt true for me in my body. I always say to my clients, if it's light, it's right. If it's heavy, it's wrong. In my body, it felt light to pick up and lead. I mean, people thought I was going to run for mayor of DC. I've been embedded in DC. So much after school programs started organizing. People really thought I was going to be on DC City Council, run for mayor, et cetera. Like, no, this is my opportunity to take a chance. That's why you said on the risk meter, on some instances, I'm a 5.
Yeah.
But I've always realized where I'm like in the middle too.
In the middle. Yeah. Well, I'm glad you brought up that decision making about if it's heavy, it's wrong. If it's light, it's right. Um, I remember one of the first coaches I had after I had left corporate, 20 years in corporate, so you kind of know how to navigate things that's comfortable. And then you're like, well, now what's next? And how do I find that next thing? And it didn't come around very quickly. So I was starting to get that, oh, I'm not feeling very good about things. And so I hired a coach. And that's one of the things that she introduced to me, this light, well, how do you hold things lightly, number one, and not get too attached? And then how do you also, with your decision making, looking at things, what's light and right versus what's heavy for you. So
Yeah.
that's how you help others as well. So thank you for sharing that, because I forget sometimes that that's a important point. And how do you stay in that space?
Yeah. Because I think we often, and I don't know if this is the same for men and women, but definitely women, because I specialize in coaching women executives. Um, I think we want to please so often, and we are working, and we're the mom, and we're the sister, and we're the daughter, and all those that natural caretaking. I
Hmm.
think we often find ourselves, at least I know I have, as a people pleaser and wanting to be the kind of person I think other people want me to be, and not always in touch with what do I want. Am I trying to, is what I want because I think other people expect that of me, or is what I want because it's what I want? And that takes some real soul searching. And that's, I think, the, embodied leadership, looking within your body to see, but also if you are a, person of faith, whatever you want to call yourself. You could, worship your dog. I don't care. I personally have a pretty deep spiritual practice, but I also sit and think about it and really have a conversation with God, universe, your dog, whatever you want to call it, with yourself, and
Hmm.
really try to tap into that innate inner wisdom that we do all have. But I think sometimes we keep ourselves so busy, we can't always hear it.
Oh, yeah, that's a good point. That whole busyness thing, right? That you just end up saying yes to so much. I think that's probably one of the silver linings out of COVID, right? Is that it forced people to maybe get rid of that busyness. I know it did me.
Definitely
And
did me. Yeah.
really evaluate, wait a minute, why was I doing some of these things and prioritizing? And yeah, it really has changed things. So
Yeah.
how did you, it sounds like, you were so passionate about causes, involved in so many, and such a strong leader. I can see why people are like, oh, I want to recruit you for my organization or for my cause. So I saw a lot of that in your theme too, is that you were recruited, right? That people were recruiting you. And it seems like the timing was good because you were reaching a point of accomplishing something big and then maybe feeling bored in your current situation. But Then you get fired. You write, so things really slow down for you, right? So what happened in that? That sounds like a big transition. And how did that affect your ego? And because
Oh,
people in transition listening to this, so far what you've said has just been amazing. And I always wondered about people like, wow, I'd love to be recruited. How do people get recruited, especially when you're in transition and looking? And so anyway, so tell us a little bit about your ego in that time frame when maybe it wasn't as strong as you'd wanted.
yeah, I would say there's 2 points. 2009, my ex-husband walked out on me. Like literally, it was when I was running for office and I was dialing for dollars and he came in and said, "I can't do this anymore." And I was like, "What are you talking about? This as in go get dinner?" He's like, "No, be married to you," and got in his truck and left.
Wow. Wow.
And it's in my book, but it's a much longer story. But that moment, like, along this whole thing, I had been a coach for one of the premier personal growth and development companies. At the same time, I was doing all this work, which truly kept me on the quote unquote straight and narrow because I always was out to transform myself and understand that I'm not a victim of my circumstances, that I am the author of my story, and
Mhm.
that the biggest key, and I'm going to give 3 keys. One is dealing only with the facts, because all the rest is story. And Buddha says all suffering lies in our story. And I agree. Number 2, say everything to the people around you, the I love yous, the I'm mad at you, because every time you step over something, you're creating a distance between you and that other person until sometime you're both going to be leaving the room because there's so much distance. You're on 2 sides of the planet. And number 3, empower each other. So critical. But at that point in time, it came out of nowhere for me. And I was running for office at the same time, if you can imagine. So I had people on speed dial. And through this whole time, coaching people, people would talk to me about depression, and I had compassion, but not empathy. And
Mm.
all of a sudden I go, wow, I am depressed. I can't get out of bed in the morning. And I had to keep working,
Mhm.
and also my mom died of ovarian cancer eventually, but she just had a recurrence. And the day he walked out, the next day I was flying to Florida to be with her for the week to support her. And her and my stepdad had to turn around to support me. It was probably good for her to take her mind off it, quite honestly.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
I had people on speed dial just getting me through that. But that moment, and I did, and that moment where I'm on that street corner, I felt I didn't have my mom to talk to because she had just died. I'm in a city I've lived in before, but really don't have close friends anymore. The place I'm living is owned by the company I just got fired from. I can't afford to keep building the house that I'm building because I no longer have the salary to go with it. And I had gained probably 20, 30 pounds after my mom's death because she had ovarian cancer for 5.5 years. So it was a long, almost 5.5 years, a long time of grappling with that. So I had a wonderful realtor who sold the home that hadn't been built yet and got me all my money back. You can believe that
Wow.
one.
Wow.
Still a dear friend to this day. I had another trusted friend who took me and my cat in, and I got to pay her $300 a month living in her third floor of her condo. I lived off the money that I got back. And it really was a massive blow to my ego. I wrote my book during that time, so I was able to grieve my mother, and the story just came pouring out of me. And the whole time, I'm still coaching people and leading seminars for a company called Landmark Worldwide. And so I have a lot of support around me. And this is what's key. Those moments when you are down, a lot of times we want to bury our head under the
Mm.
covers. We feel like we can't ask for help because that makes us look weak. Except everybody around you would want to know to support you. And you keeping that information from people is like giving a gift back or not accepting an acknowledgement because we all want to be there for each other. So I allowed people to support me. I worked my way through that. I went through a couple different iterations of what I was going to do. I went and worked for a nonprofit as their chief fundraiser. And then we had to downsize and I laid myself off because I said to the CEO, if you're going to raise the money, then I'm the second highest paid person here. Cut the budget, lay me off. I wasn't meant to be working there full time, but I went from a consultant to full time. then I thought, okay, and I have a dear friend who's always been my trusted advisor through my career changes. And she's been a dear friend for a long time. And so her next door neighbor was hiring a community programs director for a solar company, which was owned by BP, a big corporation. And Lori said to me, she goes, look, we're not getting any younger. You need to go work for a corporation that you can retire from. Because at the time I was 40, I'm trying to think, 48, 40, I just turned 56. So I was like 48. And I thought, okay, well, that's good. I can build up my retirement. I can work there. It was a phenomenal company to work for. I loved everybody. I loved what I did. We were making a huge difference. However, from a bottom line standpoint, the solar piece wasn't making the company the money it needed to. And so and I had built the whole team up, to 12 people, et cetera. And they did away with the personal solar and just went commercial solar. And I went in on a Monday morning, and what's really interesting, so I wrote the first iteration of my book. It took me 4 years. I did 7 rewrites. I had a crisis of confidence. Do I publish or not? 2 very trusted advisors said to me, absolutely, you've got something to say. One of them was my book coach as well as my agent. And then my boss asked me to come in on a Monday at 8 a.m. and he pushes this folder and he goes, I'm sorry, your services are no longer needed. And we had such a tight relationship. I go, Gary, get the F out. I said the word. I go, get the F out. And he goes, no, I'm serious. And I looked, and I have a tear rolling and he has a tear rolling. He's like, Jen, it's not performance related. We had to, make cuts. And I said, well, what's happening to my department? 6 other people were being laid off. And I said, look, can I do that? Can I stay and lay those people off? And he goes, yes, you can. You absolutely can. I said, there's also a few loose ends I need to tie up so that the remaining 6 people can have access to everything. I got to give out my password. So I stayed that day, laid the rest of the team off that I had to lay off, sewed everything up. And I got home, and the next day my book came out.
Ooh.
Right. And my book, When I Die, Take My Panties, is really my platform to educate women about ovarian cancer because my mom was misdiagnosed for a year and I don't want it's really hard to diagnose. I don't want another family or woman going through that. So I was going to be at a conference in 2 weeks at the big ovarian cancer conference.
Mm-hmm.
And I playfully put something on Facebook, hey community, what makes you stop at a table? Because I knew I was going to have this table. My friend's husband called me. He goes, what are you doing? Whatever he said, I couldn't tell you this date, Kathy, and Stephen doesn't know either. But that 5-minute conversation, I swear, within a week, and 3 of the top executives at the company called me to find out what I was doing because they wanted to recruit me to go work for them in whatever capacity they were doing next. I'm like, nope, I'm opening up my own company. I get my role. This is the 4th job I've been laid off of as I wrote this book. My job is to empower women to have a say in their health and their life, and I'm going to become a full-time coach. That's what I'm going to do. And then there was no turning back.
Wow. Wow.
Bah!
Yeah. And now you're in your love what I'm doing job, and I take it you're not bored. And
No.
And every day is probably different for you, and every client is an amazing opportunity to just get to know someone and be part of them and help them be happy. Wow.
Absolutely. And have them be happy, have them transform and be the leader they've always known themselves to be, and then transform their team and the organization if that's what they bring me in to do. I'm a keynote speaker and have traveled all over the world to speak on imposter syndrome, as well as, are you willing to fail spectacularly? Really how to lead without limits is one of my favorite topics, and how to deal with imposter syndrome. And I love what I do. Every day is different, but the biggest rush I get is when my clients have those aha moments and they get who they are. Because I know who they are. And we always need people around us to remind us how amazing we are and how brilliant we are and how talented. And I've always had people around me to remind me when I've been at my lowest, and I'm now that for other people, and I could not be happier.
So you can see it in them. They can't see it themselves many times. And I know I've been there, done that. I've been on both sides of that, right? I see it in someone else. I'm like, how can you not see this? and then also others, and with me. Well, Jen, thank you. I got to tell you, we could go on. I could continue to. I have all these questions for you, but there does have to be a time limit on these interviews. So I do think we need to wrap up. And I know we've kind of talked a little bit about some of the patterns and themes, but I always like to ask at the end, when you look back on your life and your career, what do you think served you best? It's a characteristic, a habit maybe, or maybe something, some words of wisdom. What do you think served you best that others might benefit from if you share it at this point?
I think number one is always having hope and being positive that things will turn out. That's number one. I think having tenacity. And when I mean tenacity, I don't think you have to be born with tenacity. I think it's being willing to experiment and try things out and fail. And I feel like oftentimes people don't even want to try because they've already in their head worked it out 20 steps down the road,
Hmm.
but we don't know. And until we're committed, there's always that hesitancy, that want to draw back. It's my favorite quote from Walter Murray, always ineffectiveness. And one thing that's true that kiboshes the plans of any man is that when we commit, providence moves too, and moves all kinds of doors, opens all kinds of doors we never saw possible. So have tenacity, experiment, and keep having hope that it's all going to sort itself out, because it will, I promise you.
All right. Well, those great words of wisdom and inspiration, I think that's a great place for us to wrap up today. But I do think maybe I need to put you on the list for take two and go deeper into some of these things, because I think you've got so many amazing things that you're part of, and I think what you're coaching on today you've lived, and so I'm very curious about that. So anyway, I do have your book here, so I'm excited to get started reading that, and then that'll give me another perspective of you. So thank you so much for sharing your story today. You never know who you're going to move, touch, and inspire, and who needed to hear what you had to say today. So thank you.
You're so welcome. It was a pleasure to be here.
And listeners, if you enjoyed today's interview, please subscribe below, and then you'll be alerted for other interviews as they come due. If you have any questions for me or for Jen, you can note those on my website, lifestorycurator.com, which is where I post these interviews. And then I'll also post her social media and ways to get in touch with Jen so that you can order her book, or if you want to talk to her more about her coaching, etc. So I would highly recommend that. So on that note, I guess I will wish you well, Jen, and listeners, wish you well. Stay safe, and let's keep this storytelling going. Have a great day.